Hi, welcome everyone. Malaysian International Food and Beverage Trade Fair, MIFB 2021 is going virtual this year. MIFB is the future of the food business. MIFB is the largest and leading food and beverage focused trade event in the country, which offers a platform for businesses from the industry to showcase their products and services at an international trade platform. The previous MIFB 2019 was a huge success and helped entrench the trade fair as the #1 bread, food and beverage trade fair in Malaysia, with a special award recognition by the Malaysian Book of Records for Malaysia's largest food and beverage trade fair. In 2020, however, the event had to be postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Nonetheless, MIFB is happy to be back this year in 2021, bringing to you the latest trends from the F&B industry, as well as conversations from leading industry experts. Hi, my name is Leng Hin, or you can call me Alibaba. I'm a certified plant-based expert and the founder of Wonder Penguin, a plant-based superfood startup based in Malaysia. As a former corporate professional who has traveled to more than 25 countries, I was inspired by the plant-based cuisines around the world and aim to share the power of plant-based food in transforming our health. I'm honored to be invited to moderate today's discussion on global demand on plant-based protein. Allow me to introduce to you our three experts panelists today. First, we have Mr. Shadu Dabil, Innovation Specialist from the Good Food Institute, India. Mr. Shadu works as an innovation specialist to accelerate the early stage innovation ecosystem for the smart protein sector and enable GFI teams of experts in shaping the future of food efficiently, effectively, and sustainably. Over the past 8 years, he has studied food through the fields of engineering, applied sciences, R&D, entrepreneurship, management, and a highly complementary liberal arts. Today, he will be sharing his view and insights on poised for takeoff, the alternative protein landscape in India for feeding 10 billion by 2050. Secondly, Dr. Nida Salma, nutritionist and PhD research scholar from Academy of Scientific and Innovative Research. Dr. Nida is a passionate nutritionist with around 7 years of research experience in food science and nutrition. She had pursued her PhD in the Protein Chemistry and Technology Department at Central Food Technological Research Institute in India. I beg your pardon. Her areas of expertise includes product development to address various health conditions, preparation of plant-based proteins such as protein isolates, hydrosylates, human nutrition, and medical nutrition therapy. And today, she will be talking about importance of plant proteins in nutrition, health, and wellness. And our third panelist is Mr. Eugene Wang, co-founder and CEO of Sophie's Bionutrient Private Limited. Eugene Wang grew up immersed in the vegetarian food business. Since 2010, his vision for launching Sophie's Kitchen, the first plant-based seafood alternative, has manifested into a viable category innovation lauded by the press and social media thought leaders. In 2019, Eugene took the alternative protein to the microorganism level and started another new venture in Singapore, Sophie's Bionutrients Private Limited. And today he will be sharing about East versus West. What are the key differences when considering plant-based diet in different global markets? So today we are three key highlights that we focus during this panel discussion in the afternoon. Through this discussion, you'll get to know what is driving plant-based nature. Number two, consumers' increasing demand for great tasting and healthy plant-based food. And finally, the way plant-based food will help the food industry meeting nutritional needs in an affordable, healthy, and sustainable way. So in the chat box, you'll see a very important question that will guide our panel discussion today. I invite you to vote and share your thoughts in the Zoom poll in the next 30 seconds. So let's start voting now. So, done? Right, thanks for voting, and we'll definitely be taking into consideration of your vote in today's panel discussion. Right. During the presentation from our honorable panelists, please send in your questions. Okay. So there's some technical, because I understand there's a poll. I understand from the admin there's no poll for today. Okay. All right. So I'll just bring you through from the next agenda, which is the presentation. So during the presentation, please send in your question in the chat box below, and they'll be answering your questions after the presentation. So let's welcome today's presentation with Mr. Shadu, who will be sharing his view and insights on Poised for Takeoff, the alternative protein landscape in India for feeding 10 billion by 2050. Over to you, Mr. Shadu.
Thank you so much, Alibaba, for that warm introduction. I'm really glad to be here on this panel on the topic of global demand for plant-based protein at MIFB's Future Food Panel discussion. I love going through the website and understanding what this food and beverage trade fair kind of does for Malaysia and all the food value chain stakeholders involved within the Malaysian food industry. So quite excited to be speaking with all the attendees present with us today. Like Alibaba said, my session is going to be the kickoff session to basically get us started with this panel discussion, and I hope you're able to see my screen and hear me properly. I'm just going to do a quick chat check if you're able to confirm if you're able to hear me and see my screen. Perfect. Okay, great. So I'll get started with my presentation for today. Really quickly, just putting it on read mode, and my like Alibaba gave a warm introduction. I'm a food scientist by education. I've been thinking about food systems for the past 10 years. Currently, I work as an innovation specialist, and I'm going to largely talk about alternative protein, which means plant-based proteins, plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy primarily, and then also fermentation-derived meat, eggs, and dairy, and cultivated meat, eggs, and dairy. But we are going to largely focus on plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy in line with the topic of our discussion today. I'll be presenting for the next 23 minutes, basically really quickly through a bunch of slides and primarily focus on the Indian landscape and the innovation that we are seeing in this sector as a sector building organization, and what synergies exist for Malaysia and India, and what kind of bottlenecks and opportunities can be extrapolated for the Malaysian food ecosystem as well from our learnings in India while building this sector. So let's get started. What is the challenge? Why do we need alternative proteins and plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy in the first place, right? Don't we have enough animals giving us a lot of meat, eggs, and dairy already? But that's the thing, right? In the next 45 years, with the kind of ambitious goal of feeding 10 billion people by 2050, what we have to account for is essentially the number of people that are going to increase to be fed. And we need to grow more than the same amount of food in the next 45 years as approximately as much as we've grown in the past 10,000 years. And usually we talk about the first and second kind of a graph where we are talking about the food thrown or food wasted in the food value chain. So if 100 calories were produced in India, 30 calories is wasted, and that number might look a little different for Malaysia because it's slightly more advanced food manufacturing ecosystem. But nobody's talking about the wastage in the food production because of cycling all the calories and growing all this food and feeding it to animals, which in turn we have to eat to satiate our demands for meat, eggs, and dairy. So how do we find an alternative to that? At the same time, more than 2 billion people globally face food insecurity. And the system that I'm talking about is really inefficient, right? 8 calories going in, 1 calorie coming out in case of chicken, 34 calories going in, 1 calorie coming out in case of a cow. So the conversion rates are really, really bad, and you cannot do much to change it. We've already adopted a factory farming animal agriculture kind of a model where we have optimized these animals for the most amount of milk, eggs, and meat they can produce. And this is what we've got. This is what we have arrived at. So we are essentially wasting almost 87 to 97% food in the production method itself globally, right? Which is a big thing to think about. And when we talk about India and Malaysia, in many ways, there's a lot of malnutrition as well present in the bottom of pyramid population. At the same time, in a country like India and other developing parts of Southeast Asia, many farmers depend on livelihood for animal husbandry and animal food value chain. But pandemics like this, zoonotic diseases, multiple other diseases like swine flu, bird flu are decimating millions of populations of pigs and birds everywhere across these countries, including China, India, many other parts of Southeast Asia in the past few years. And this means that farmers are essentially dependent on this kind of a model, and they don't have any value addition of their income through diverse sources of protein, for example, plant proteins. And multiple thought leadership papers, and even UN has said that increasing human dependency on animal protein is one of the most likely causes for the next pandemic that we'd see, amongst other things that I mentioned on the screen. So the current system is not sustainable, it's not efficient, and it's not safe. It's one of the top 3 reasons for land erosion, water use, coral reefs getting destroyed. And basically 75% of the land we currently have on Earth, we use it to basically grow food for animals, and then essentially feed these livestock, and they are only giving us 1/3 of the global protein supply. So something's wrong in the system, right? And at the same time, the greenhouse gas emissions, methane emissions in cases of cow are huge. Like, they are sometimes more than entire transportation sector combined everywhere in the world. And the kind of emissions of greenhouse gases coming from transportation. And at the same time, we are feeding a lot of antibiotics to these animals. So essentially, the system is not also super kind of safe in terms of antibiotic resistant microbes, which are gonna get into our food systems in the next 20 years. And many scientists and global agencies, FDA, UN, has been kind of predicting a lot of deaths coming in the few decades because of this kind of an ecosystem. But despite of knowing all of this, people are not really shifting away from meat, eggs, and dairy. The consumption of meat, eggs, and dairy, especially meat in Asia, Southeast Asia, India, Malaysia, has been growing up very rapidly, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, much faster than other parts of the world. And that's because the most population growth and the most disposable income kind of a population having that, high income to consume these relatively high sources of protein is increasing rapidly in these countries. So 70% meat increased demand by 2050. And, like I was saying, past 30 years, if you see India here and many Southeast Asian countries, including Malaysia, all of them are basically seeing a very high increase in poultry consumption. And that's going to continue for the next 20 years, which means that we have to find sustainable solutions in this part of the world on a priority basis. So the solution is alternative proteins. And that is where I work at the Good Food Institute, which is a global, basically an international non-profit network. We are an Indian non-profit, the GFI India kind of entity, and we basically focus on building the smart protein or the alternative protein sector in India through science and technology, corporate engagement, and our policy engagement and government and regulatory engagement work as well. We are essentially a non-profit trying to create this sector from a 360-degree perspective. Entrepreneurs, investors, value chain stakeholders, researchers, academicians, students, anybody you can think of, they're part of our community and strategically working with each other in India to basically build this sector. And we are currently more than 1,000 members in India. It's a non-profit membership group, and we'll be happy to connect with people who are interested in the Indian markets as well from Malaysia. But basically, alternative proteins fall into these 3 key modalities when you look at infrastructure and production: plant-based proteins, fermentation, and cultivated meat. Right? Today, we are going to talk primarily about plant-based proteins in my session. So what are we really talking about when we are talking about plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy? We're talking about biomimics of, so if you think about it, what is meat or what is milk or what is egg? It's just a bunch of chemicals, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals put together by nature, right? What food science did in the past 20 years since this sector really took off was understood that it's not about creating veggie burgers, or it's not about creating, just soy milk or almond milk, which you can create in your kitchens as well, because that's not, especially Southeast Asian countries or India had a long history, of consuming seitan and tofu, but those are not the kind of products that non-vegetarians are looking to eat. So the demand for meat that we saw increasing is coming from omnivores or flexitarians or, hardcore non-vegetarians. We have to create biomix of products for them, basically. So that's the end goal here, but we are using plant proteins to do it. That's why plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. And alternative protein products will fall on a spectrum, right, from fully plant-based, which is like a tofu, to fully cultivated. And Impossible Burger, for example, falls kind of an example of hybrid product between fully plant-based and their heme component, soy hemoglobin, that they have added to their burgers to give that red, meaty, bloody kind of a tinge to it, is basically a example of hybrid product. So these are some examples of plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy globally. Meat made from yellow pea protein, 89% less greenhouse gases, 99% less water. Again, plant-based eggs made from mung bean, 98% less water, 83% less land. A lot of dairy sources, pea. I've seen, delicious plant-based cheeses made from cauliflower, seeds of different fruits and vegetables. So it's all possible using modern food science and technology, and essentially finding much more sustainable sources of plant proteins to make these products, which replicate the sensory properties, at the same time functional properties of your end applications, which is what consumers are really looking for. And at the same time, when you look at all of its environmental benefits, plant-based meat is this first column, cultivated meat is the second column, and then we are kind of comparing with conventional or slaughtered animal meat, eggs, and dairy products. It has huge benefits on land use, water use, air pollution, use of toxic chemicals through the process and the value chain, and emissions of greenhouse gases. So it's a win-win for environmental SDGs as well. And alternative protein kind of contributes to a lot of UN SDGs, in fact, 10 of them to be precise. So a lot of investment, don't just take my word for it, because I'm seeing globally, all major investment banks, hedge funds, thought leadership groups, JP Morgan's, AT Kearney's, EY Parthenon's, Credit Suisse, BCGs of the world have been kind of giving their estimates, and all of the average kind of comes between 100 to 350 billion kind of a market size for 2035 for alternative meat, eggs, and dairy products, primarily for alternative meat, and you can look at some of these in our reports on our website as well at length. But basically the investment overview as a snapshot, we have seen a 3x increase in plant-based, 2x increase in fermentation, and 6x increase in cultivated meat, eggs, and dairy investments over the past year. And 2020 has been a breakthrough year for this kind of a sector. And APAC has been a key leader in this, right? Huge amount of investment, 6x, 7x in plant-based and cultivated in the APAC region, which shows the huge potential that our region kind of presents to the rest of the global world to feed 10 billion people by 2050. So a few key consumer insights, and I'm going to take a quick check, and I'm going to also request everyone, this is a fast-paced session. So if you have any questions, do kind of put them in the Q&A box or the chat section, and I can look at them once I'm kind of done with the presentation. Really quickly, also just taking a time check. Perfect. So I think we still have half time to go. Great. So so basically about the meat demand, right, across Asia, 25 increase in the plant-based meat demand across APAC in the next 5 years. And I saw that recently Tyson Foods has launched a plant-based meat brand in Malaysia, and they've poised at 5% a yearly growth rate for plant-based meat in the Malaysian market specifically. So the APAC market is poised to be $1.7 billion market by 2025. That's just in the next 4 years. And a lot of growth is going to come from India, Indonesia, Malaysia, China, and rest of Asia as well. And, this is not just localized phenomena. It's not just US, UK, or Europe, right? It's not just the Western countries. A lot of Eastern countries and other South African countries, South Asian countries, South American countries have been showing a lot of likelihood of eating plant-based meat substitutes. I can talk about India, China specifically, and also you can see Malaysia here, where people are really open to trying plant-based meats and also looking to pay a premium for them. Remarkable events happened this year. The egg swap at Decos, you might have heard in the APAC region, there was a 22% price cut on Omnipore, which is another very famous brand in the APAC region and the Asian region. Also, the international QSRs going local with Green Butcher at Starbucks, and many such other examples in QSR chains adapting localized kind of products, which are specific to Malaysian cuisine in the case of audience today. And for me, the diverse set of Indian cuisine we have and local product market fit in there. Talking about neighbors of Malaysia, Singapore has done excellent in terms of all proteins. They have done excellent in terms of plant protein and cultivated as well. In fact, it became the first country in December to basically approve the sale of cultivated meat products anywhere in the world. With the company I told you earlier about, Eat Just, they basically launched a cultivated chicken company, and now you can just order it on your phone and get it delivered, at your home in Singapore. They started all protein courses at universities, and we are looking to replicate a lot of that work in India, and we work closely with the Singapore ecosystem as well, like we would want to do in the future with the Malaysian ecosystem. And at the same time, the Indian market, if I want to give you specific insights, we're at the early adopter stage. This is like a product market curve that you usually see in all sectors. So we are here currently, innovators and early adopters cohort. We're seeing version 1.5 products, which are better than, soy nuggets and tofu and seitan and just kitchen-made plant-based milks. These are shelf-stable, these are functional, these are really looking to replicate the functionality and both the sensory and texture properties, etc., of the meat, eggs, and dairy products they are trying to basically replace. Sooner with innovation curves, as we're seeing globally, will reach an early adopter kind of a cohort, which is a huge population in India across all cities. And I'm sure that's true for Malaysia as well, and we'll see that a little later. But as we saw in 2018 and 2020, and we kind of validated this with external surveys as well, huge population in India is inclined towards, firstly, they're aware about plant-based meats, they're likely to try plant-based meats, and they're likely to also purchase them regularly if they are true to their word of essentially biomimicking the taste, texture, and functional properties, right? And this is the early adopter cohort, which you can draw some insights for the Malaysian market, because the early adopter cohorts, whether it's India or Singapore or Malaysia or Hong Kong or London, they kind of behave in similar ways. They have Netflix subscriptions, they use cloud kitchens for ordering 5 to 10 to 15 times a week. They are, in the age group of 25 to 44. They have a college degree, so they're more educated about environmental factors and sustainability factors. And, they have some median income, which is higher than average. In India, it's more than 50,000 rupees INR. So that's the kind of cohort we're looking at. And most importantly, to remember, these are omnivores we are looking at. Because why would a vegetarian or a vegan want to eat meat, eggs, or dairy products in the first place? And even if they're missing the functionality of it, they would be flexitarian then, not really vegan or vegetarian. Like my mom's a lifelong vegetarian, and she's never going to eat plant-based meat, the actual plant-based meat, because it tastes too much like meat. It smells too much like meat, right? So that's not the target cohort we are focusing at. That's a high vegetarian protein category cohort, which is separate from plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy, which is a very important point to remember in any market or globally. So it's not just about taste, price, and convenience. So it's not just about replicating the taste. So it's not just about tasting the same or better, costing the same or less, and being as equally and conveniently available in the supply chain, but it's also a gastronomic experience. People in India have specific cuisines. All our states have different cuisines. Hundreds and hundreds of different local food cuisines exist in India. And that means that there's a lot of local product market fit. And I know that, Malaysia is also a melting pot of a lot of different cultures, the Chinese culture, the Indian culture, the Malay culture, and all of a lot of Southeast Asian countries kind of feeding their food cultures into Malaysia as well. So I know there's a lot of scope for innovation in the local market. So basically, the target audience is similar to the Western kind of early adopter cohort and, QSR going kind of an audience. The focus is on meat eaters, snacking formats, flavors which replicate and mimic the sensory experience of consuming meat, eggs, and dairy is important. In India, chicken and mutton are very important, but I know in Malaysia, beef is also quite important for some segments of population. Pork is also quite important. And, taste is obviously important, but the entire gastronomic kind of multi-sensorial experience, the way I'm supposed to buy it when I go ahead and buy it. Maybe I source it from a local shop currently. How are I going to replace that bit? Maybe I cook it, as a tailgating kind of an exercise at my backyard, or I grill it. The sound frequency at which the meat sizzles, that is also important for me as a customer. So that's what all the food scientists are looking to replicate currently in this kind of a domain. Really quickly, in the last 3-4 minutes, I want to focus on the supply chain. So, moisture, flavor, and texture are the key barriers right now. It's the plant tea beanie aftertaste, strong soy flavors. They are dry. They're not like meat. That's the problem with the current plant-based meat products. And the solution comes across the value chain, right? From sourcing the right crops with the right genotype, phenotypes, understanding the high protein content of those crops that you're growing in the first place, to, extracting them. A lot of science come in making isolates and concentrates. For these kind of products, just flours are not useful, right? You cannot just have wheat flour or high protein flours and make these products. You need concentrates and isolates, which are highly concentrated form of proteins. So raw material optimization is a key step in the value chain as well, for which mechanical, chemical engineers and a lot of value chain stakeholders in the ingredient value chain in Malaysia would find this quite useful to kind of add on to the white space opportunity areas. And then there's a lot of co-manufacturing, scale up, new product development. Food scientists come in here, replicate the organoleptic synthetic properties, and then they create it into a final product, which is the third key part of the value chain. And there are opportunities here across the value chain. While choosing ingredients, a lot of people ask me, then what are the next 5 key plant-based proteins, right? It's not that simple. Depends on your geography. Obviously, the most important thing is sourcing local. So if a global company is coming to Malaysia or India, they have to source locally, because otherwise the carbon footprint, etc., won't really make sense in the purpose of the mission of the sector, right? And at the same time, India being a very biodiverse kind of a country with 15 biodiverse zones and hundreds of pulses, millets, and being one of the largest exporters of a lot of these things, there's a huge opportunity. I'm sure there are a lot of ingredients in Malaysia where the opportunity exists as well. But you have to look at protein concentrations, you have to look at the nutrition or PDCAS scores, you have to look at the allergenicity risk of these kind of different crops, you have to look at what commercial stage they exist globally. Are there any aftertaste or flavor issues with them, which are usually attributed to soy? That's why it's, orange here. Obviously, there are allergenicity risks with soy. That's why it's red here. There are obviously functionality concerns. The kind of protein I'm choosing, is it perfect to go into meat, eggs, or dairy application within dairy? Is it good to go in yogurt, or is it good to go in cheese? All of that research is pending, because for the past 70 years, all the countries globally have prioritized wheat, rice, corn, and soy. But we have really neglected a lot of millets, pulses, and a lot of these diverse crops, which are protein rich. And that's why that fundamental R&D and knowledge is missing. So that's something we have to think about. And then we have to think about sourcing global crop volume. Are these quantities and supply chains for these crops available for me so that I can start a business, which is huge, and still source locally, which is a key challenge for many entrepreneurs currently. These are some other than the ones I mentioned here. These are some of the other potential, crops and plants that we see are becoming quite important in the next couple of decades as well in this sector. So just for you to take a quick look. And then obviously algae, seaweed, and aquatic plants are also quite important for the plant-based side of things. A lot of times they're considered from a regulatory perspective in the plant-based side of things as well. They're high in protein, very rich in omega, and especially for plant-based seafood, which is a huge white space. We just talked about chicken and mutton and pork and beef, but what about seafood? Like, India and Malaysia and rest part of Southeast Asia have huge coastlines and hundreds of varieties of fish and crustaceans that we consume. And obviously, Eugene will talk more about it, but basically plant-based seafood and alternative seafood is a major white space, and looking at such ingredients for product development in those areas is also a big opportunity. So these are the kind of things we're looking at when choosing protein blends, right? And this is important to note. It's not about a hero category of a protein. It's about specific blends of plant proteins, which are giving you the functionality that you aspire for in your end product. Protein quality, nutrition, the availability, consumer perception is quite important. There might be some negative connotations with GMO kind of soy. So, it's a complete no-go in India, for example. So such kind of considerations. The cost obviously is a major consideration for any business. Aroma, flavor, texture, mouthfeel are all the things you have to kind of keep in mind. All of these things in turn depend on dispersibility, solubility, viscosity, gelation, emulsification, foaming, water holding, oil holding. These are all food tech terms, right? Technical jargons to help you understand the attributes of these proteins, which would help us get those meaty textures and, ball bearing effect in our mouth when you drink a glass full of dairy, all of that. And they in turn are again dependent on a lot of process parameters, chemistry, biochemistry, food processing parameters like solvent, pH, concentration, temperature, time, pressure, shear, concentration of different angles of extrusion that you apply on meat, etc., etc. Currently, these are the technologies we use for making plant-based meats. Extrusion is the main one. You get a lot of TVPs from low moisture extrudeds, and you get a lot of high moisture extrudeds as well from high moisture extrusion. So those are key technologies. Then we also have some mechanical innovation happening in 3D printing and shear cell technology. That's still very limited, not really scaled up. And we are seeing some innovation in fermentation areas as well. But these are kind of the emerging technology areas for making plant-based meats. As I was telling you about, not just the upstream manufacturing and distribution part, where a lot of global distributors and food supply chain players would play a key role, also ingredient suppliers, but also workforce and business services across these areas. This is a building of a sector altogether in every country that is being built in. So you need lawyers, you need marketing professionals, you need literally everybody who are enablers of the ecosystem. And having this crucial support is very important for this ecosystem to succeed in any country. So yeah, these are the kind of bottlenecks we see in India. And I think Malaysia would also be kind of pretty good to also find synergies in this. I have some more points on specific collaborations of Malaysia and India and the bottlenecks bottlenecks that we see in these two areas, but I'll kind of reserve that for the Q&A session at the end. With that, I'll kind of take a quick pause and I'll look for and wait for your Q&A and chats, and I'll reply them when the next speakers kind of are getting on with their session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shadu, for your presentation. And I'm sure that everyone has gotten insights on the diverse source of protein in the future. It's so exciting, as well as the emerging opportunities within the industry. Next, I want to invite Dr. Nida, who will be speaking about the importance of plant proteins in nutrition and wellness. Over to you, Dr. Nida.
Thank you, Alibaba. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizing committee of the Malaysian International Food and Beverage Trade Fair for giving me this wonderful opportunity to share my knowledge. Let's get into the presentation. I hope my presentation is visible. Yes. So I will be talking about the importance of plant proteins in nutrition, health, and wellness. First, let us quickly understand what are proteins made of and what are the important plant sources of protein. Proteins are made up of amino acids. Amino acids are known as the building blocks of proteins. Proteins are absolutely essential for us because they are required for cell growth, tissue repair, muscle repair, for the production of hormones in our body, for the synthesis of enzymes, etc. These amino acids of proteins are classified into two different types: essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids. Essential amino acids are absolutely essential. They cannot be synthesized by our body and we need to consume them through the food, whereas non-essential amino acids can be synthesized by our body. So these are the list of essential and non-essential amino acids. Now let us see what are the important plant sources of protein. One of the most important plant sources of proteins are legumes, pulses, and lentils. That's the chickpea, green gram dal, kidney beans, etc. The protein content present in this food group varies from 18 to 25%, and it is recommended to consume at least 60 grams of legumes and pulses every day. Next major source of proteins are nuts, such as walnuts, almonds, pistachios, cashews. The protein content present in this food group varies from 18 to 20%, and it is recommended to consume at least 20 grams of nuts every day. Cereals and pulses may not be very high in protein content, but they are our staple food and we tend to consume them in larger amounts. So they provide a substantial amount of protein. So cereals such as rice, wheat, and oats contain about 7 to 11% of protein, and it is recommended to consume at least 300 grams of cereals every day. Now let us understand the concept of protein quality. The protein quality is expressed as protein digestibility corrected amino acid score, and it is simply called PDCAS. PDCAS is calculated by multiplying the amino acid score with the protein digestibility. Amino acid score is derived by comparing the essential amino acid content of the protein with the reference protein. And the reference protein is based on the essential amino acid requirements of 2 to 5 years old child. Okay. So PDCAS varies from 0 to 1. The value PDCAS value varies from 0 to 1, 1 being the lowest, 0 being the lowest and 1 being the highest. So the highest PDCAS a protein can get is 1. So what is the meaning of protein having PDCAS value of 1? It means that the protein contains all the essential amino acids such as leucine, isoleucine, valine, histidine, threonine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, tyrosine. All these essential amino acids are present in the amounts required by 2 to 5 years old child. And the protein with PDCAS value, the highest PDCAS value of 1 also means that it has good digestibility. That means most of the ingested protein is efficiently digested into amino acids, and the digested amino acids are efficiently absorbed into blood. In simple words, it means the protein with high PDCAS value has high degree of digestibility. So now let us see the protein quality of different food sources. First, I'd like to draw your attention towards the PDCAS value. Here you can see egg and milk has the highest PDCAS value of 1, which means that egg and milk has all the essential amino acids required by a 2 to 5 years old child. and it also has good digestibility. That is, the protein can be very well digested in the body. Now you can see here that the plant-based proteins have lower PDCAAS values than animal-based protein. Here, the soya protein isolate in its pure isolate protein isolate form has the protein quality closer to that of animal protein. But protein, when present in the cereals and nuts and legumes, have poor digestibility because of presence of many anti-nutritional factors and fiber. And also, these plant proteins have 1 or 2 essential amino acids in lower amounts. Among legumes, chickpea has good protein quality. Among nuts, peanut is better than almond. So peanut is always better than almonds. And then among cereals, cooked rice is better than wheat. Now let us see the percentage of essential and non-essential amino acids present in different food sources. Here you can see the composition is compared with egg protein. Here you can see that plant protein has a lower amount of essential amino acids compared to animal protein. Another important and interesting thing to observe here is plant protein has higher non-essential amino acids compared to animal protein. So what is the important thing here? The essential amino acids have many positive health benefits, which I will be dealing in detail in my coming slides. So because of the high non-essential content, non-essential amino acid content of plant protein, there are many health benefits. Let us see what are the health benefits of plant protein. Plant protein can provide protection against cardiovascular diseases by lowering the blood cholesterol and by lowering the blood pressure. Let us see how. The high non-essential amino acids present in plant protein, when they enter our blood, the non-essential amino acid stimulates the pancreas to produce glucagon hormone. This glucagon hormone's primary site of action is liver. In the liver, the glucagon hormone decreases fat storage, increases oxidation of fat or burning of fat, and decreases the synthesis of cholesterol. Now let us see how plant protein can lower the blood pressure. Arginine amino acid is abundantly present in plant protein. This arginine in our body can be used for the synthesis of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a gas. So what it does is it expands the blood vessels. Here you can see this is a normal blood vessels. In the presence of nitric oxide, the blood vessel expands. This process is called vasodilation. The blood vessels, when the blood vessel expands, the blood pressure naturally comes down. Let us see what the scientific research has to say. So this is an interesting article published in the Journal of American Heart Association, and it reports the beneficial effect of plant protein on blood cholesterol. It is a research analysis about plant protein substitution for animal protein for at least 3 weeks period. And research studies in which 30 grams per day of animal protein replaced by plant protein were analyzed. It was found that plant protein substitution could decrease the blood cholesterol levels among human subjects of 54 years of age group. In another research study, the relationship between the dietary protein and blood pressure was studied. It was an 18-month study. It was an 18-month study, and subject with stage 1 hypertension and who were not on any antihypertensive drugs were involved. The participants' dietary protein sources were monitored, and it was observed that the participants who derived protein mainly from plant sources had decreased systolic and diastolic blood pressure after 6 months. Another important health benefit of plant protein is it will help in the management of diabetes. Plant protein can reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. So this effect of plant protein is beautifully shown in this research study published in the British Journal of Nutrition. In this research study, the food and diet pattern of healthy men in Finland was studied for a period of 19 years. And it was found that plant protein intake was associated with decreased risk of developing type 2 diabetes, which means higher the protein intake from plant sources, lower was the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And the research concluded that for every 5 gram increase in plant protein intake, there was 17% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Plant protein can also help in keeping the blood glucose levels under control. And here is the evidence which shows the beneficial effect of plant protein on blood glucose control. This is an analysis in which many scientific investigations on the effect of replacing animal proteins with plant protein among type 1 diabetes patients were analyzed. Major animal protein sources such as meat, dairy were replaced with major plant sources such as legume, nuts for at least 8 weeks. And it was found that replacement of animal protein with plant protein at a level of 35% of total protein per day significantly lowered fasting glucose and glycated hemoglobin. Another interesting health benefit of plant protein is it can help in the weight management. We all know that when the calorie intake is more than the calorie burned, it promotes weight gain. On the other hand, when the calorie intake is less and the calorie burned is more, it results in weight loss. So how can plant protein be helpful in this scenario? Let me tell you, plant protein can help you in reducing the food intake. Let us see how. As I mentioned earlier, the high non-essential amino acids in blood coming from plant protein will stimulate the pancreas to produce glucagon hormone. This glucagon hormone sends signal to the brain, and the brain makes you feel full. It will give you satiety, it will make you feel full, and you'll have the satiety, that is feeling of fullness, and you will reduce the feed intake. So when the feed intake is reduced, the calorie intake is also reduced, and this will promote weight loss. So here is an interesting study. Here is an interesting study which shows the beneficial effect of plant protein in weight loss. Intake of animal and plant protein in Belgian population was assessed to study their relationship with overweight and obesity. And it was found that higher the protein intake from animal sources, higher was the weight gain and body mass index, and higher or increased was the waist circumference. Let us see in another study what happens. And in the same study, increased plant protein intake was associated with lower body mass index and lower waist circumference. Now let us see another health benefit of plant protein. It can decrease the risk of developing metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is characterized by obesity, that is higher BMI and higher waist circumference, elevated blood pressure, increased blood glucose, and increased blood cholesterol. Let us see what is the beneficial effect of plant protein in this scenario. Plant protein can help in metabolic syndrome by lowering the blood cholesterol and blood pressure, by controlling the blood sugar, and by helping in weight management. So here is a study which studied the relationship between the dietary protein from different sources and the risk of developing metabolic syndrome. So let us see. Healthy human subjects and their dietary protein sources were examined for 11 years, and it was found that higher protein intake, particularly from red meat and fried chicken, resulted in higher risk of developing metabolic syndrome. And higher plant protein intake resulted in lower risk for developing metabolic syndrome. So participants who derived protein from plant sources such as legumes and nuts had lower incidences of metabolic syndrome. So it's very important to control metabolic syndrome because this will put you at higher risk of developing heart diseases. So plant protein can also reduce the risk of cancer. First, let me tell something about insulin-like growth factor. The insulin-like growth factor in our body can cause cancer cell multiplication and tumor development. On the other hand, this is insulin-like growth factor binding protein. This binding protein binds the insulin-like growth factor and prevents the multiplication of cancer cells and tumor development. So let me tell you, non-essential amino acids of plant protein increases the insulin-like growth factor binding protein levels in the body. So it can also help in it can also reduce the risk of developing cancer. So here is an interesting article published in the International Journal of Cancer. In an 11 years of follow-up study, it was seen that 3% increase in animal protein intake was associated with 15% increase in developing bladder cancer. On the other hand, 2% increase in plant protein intake was associated with 23% lower risk for bladder cancer. So the take-home message is plant proteins such as from foods such as legume, pulses, nuts, cereals, millets, all these foods provide very good sources, very good amount of proteins in our day-to-day diet. And the plant proteins have higher non-essential and lower essential amino acids compared to animal protein. Plant proteins have 1 or 2 essential amino acids in lower amount. So it's always better to derive protein from various plant sources in a day. Scientific research has shown that increased consumption of plant foods may be associated with many positive health outcomes, such as decreased risk of developing cardiovascular diseases, improved management of diabetes, weight management, decreased risk of developing metabolic syndrome, and reduced risk of developing cancer. These are the references. So here we come to an end of the presentation. I hope you all got some insights about the health benefits of plant protein. So over to Mr. Alibaba. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your presentation. I'm sure that everyone has learned the importance of plant proteins to our overall health, well-being, and especially weight loss. I believe everyone is enjoying the presentation so far. Remember to drop your questions in the Q&A section, which will be answered later. Now, I want to invite Mr. Eugene, who will be speaking about East versus West. What are the key differences when considering plant-based diet in different global markets? Over to you, Eugene.
All right. Thank you, Alibaba. Everyone can see my screen, right? Let me, hold on a second. Sorry about that. They're not cooperating for some reason. Hold on a second. I apologize. All right. Can you see my screen? I take that as an S. All right. Okay, great. Okay, so I only have 5 slides, so hopefully I can be quick. I just want to talk about the difference between Asia and the rest of the world when it comes to plant-based foods, especially plant meat that I was going to talk about. Well, now, for those who don't know me, for those who know me, they know. I think you should know that I have a career, my whole career spending making plant meat. So I know this industry inside out. And plus that I have my family business here in Asia. I was actually born and grew up in Taiwan. So they're in Taiwan. I know a lot of the Asian market when it comes to plant meat. And I was in California, starting from 2010, starting a company called Soft's Kitchen. And then in 2019, I came back to Singapore again to start another venture in Singapore. So this kind of back and forth, East and West, I got a lot of exposure when it comes to plant-based diet. And now a lot of people in the West are talking about, oh, you know, plant meat, plant milk, plant-based this, plant-based that, that's going to take off. And then there is an assumption by default that that's going to be the same here in Asia. Now, I have to question that knowledge, that wisdom, because I think the plant-based movement here in Asia will still take off, will still be happening, but it will happen in a very different way, in my personal opinion. So the first thing I want to talk about is how long the history plant-based meat or plant-based foods is here in Asia. So starting with tofu, as you all know, plant-based tofu has been in China back in the Han Dynasty. So it's been around for about 2,000 years already. Tempeh was first mentioned in Indonesia about 12th or 13th century around that time. And the wheat gluten is also documented in China back in the 6th century. So all these plant-based foods has been around here in Asia for a long, long time. And for the longest time, why these things happening in our culture or our history, it was all because a lot of religious belief, especially Buddhism. You know, after so many years, Buddhism was the first thing that created the whole plant-based movement thousands or hundreds of years ago. And then after so many years, people in this part of the world naturally associate anything plant-based with religious belief. And that is very deep rooted in our Asian culture, many different parts of Asian culture. And I heard, I've never been to India before, but I heard that a huge part of India never eat meat in their diet. And they were just recently being introduced about meat in the last few decades. And that just tells you how meat is seen differently, or maybe should I say plant meat has been seen differently in many parts of Asia. Now, the Asian thinking, one thing you have to understand, that is very different from the Western thinking when it comes to meat, is that this is actually, I'm taking, kind of a work with the Beyond Meat's, Beyond Burgers advertisement. So the Western thinking, when it comes to plant meat, they want to pound on pound compare all the nutritional value with the real animal meat. That's the American or the Western style of thinking. If you ask any Asian, you give them this chart, all they're gonna think for the chart on the right is that this is a fake meat, this is a mock meat, this is not real meat. Why? Because meat to a lot of Asian culture is not evil, unlike most of the Western culture. Meat is actually very medicinal. Meat, especially to the East Asian culture, in a lot of the East Asian culture, say for example, women gave birth to the child, or when you go through the surgery, major surgery, the first thing your parents or your family will cook for you is a chicken soup or whatever beef or pork, rice or noodle. So meat in a lot of Asian culture is actually very sacred, very wholesome. So telling them that we're trying to make a plant-based version of that, in my personal opinion, possibly will be very hard to succeed. And quite frankly, I haven't seen a sign right here for that to happen yet. So I really do question the wisdom, or possibly should I say the opportunity for a lot of these plant meat makers here in Asia down the road, how successful they can be. But don't get me wrong, not that I wish them to fail. I'm an industry participant. I hope them succeed as well, but just that I just don't see that sign yet. Another thing is that a lot of time, these movements or these diets take off in the Western market. It is not only because the health reason, it is also, quite frankly, because the environmental appeals. And I really have to challenge you folks to think real hard. How many times when you go to grocery stores in Malaysia or not everywhere in Asia, how many times you see the paper brown bags being used in any grocery stores in Asia? Quite frankly, even today, when I went to grocery stores in Japan or Korea, quite oftenly plastic bag is still by default the offering. That just tells you environmental issue sounds noble, sounds important, but when it comes to action, a lot of people are still very lacking in terms of action. And so that is another key reason why plant-based diet is going to be having a hard time to fight for their place here in Asia. And last but not least is pricing. And this is very critical. We Asian prefer consistency. We Asian don't like to see big changes in our life or our daily living pattern or even our consumption pattern. So that is the reason why a lot of food manufacturers, they do very hard, do everything they can to keep the pricing consistent, to keep the texture consistent, to keep the flavor consistent, so that you can keep coming and buying and keep coming and buying. This is a very different mentality than a lot of the consumers in the Western market. There is a poll recently done in China. They asked the consumers in China, how many percentage of premium you're willing to pay for the cell-based meat? The research survey come back with a percentage that is only 2.2%. Quite frankly, that tells you Chinese people in China, they don't want to pay for any premium for these new stuff. They want their life to go on as usual. And so before we see the pricing of these new plant meat or whatever cell-based meat to come down to the price level that is equivalent to the real meat that we're eating today, it's gonna be hard for them to be the mainstream player in this market. However, don't get me wrong, like I said, alternative proteins still have a big opportunity. And the alternative protein has to play in another way, another role to get consumers in Asia accepted. And that's another 3 hours or maybe 3-day conversation for me to have. And that is not enough time for me to say here. So I'll just stop right here and let Alibaba to take over, and let's jump into the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Well, Thank you, Eugene, for your presentation. Certainly, you bring a very interesting perspective about plant-based proteins, and the East and West have a very different interpretation when it comes to plant-based protein. And with that, I want to thank all three panelists for sharing the detailed insights and perspective on their respective industry. So right now in the chat box, you'll see a very important question that will guide our panel discussion today. So I invite you to vote and share your thought in the Zoom poll in the next 30 seconds. So the admin will putting up the poll. And the question is, how do you think the plant-based industries are doing during the COVID-19 pandemic? So I've also submitted my answer. So I'll give you 30 seconds. So I can see that Brian actually responds slow. So done voting. And thank you for the voting. And looks like we have voted for the questions. And then we have a result here. Okay. So 57% voted for good, and then 30% go for the better, and the rest of the remaining 13% go for bad. So thanks for the vote. And now let's continue to the next segment, which is the roundtable discussion, where we can hear our experts panels share their thoughts on some important questions. Question to Mr. Shadu. Let's start with you. Question number one, in what ways can India and Malaysia collaborate on alternative protein? And number two, what are the similarities that you can see in the Indian and Malaysian markets?
Thank you, Ali Baba. Maybe I can just quickly finish up a few slides that I had presented specifically for these two questions, and also get into the larger kind of questions that I was seeing through the chat box. We stopped here, right? Very, very relevant points, mentioned by Eugene as well. It's very, very important to understand local product market fit, which is what the next 5 minutes of my presentation are going to focus on. One of the biggest misconceptions that people have that India is a vegetarian country, or that meat, eggs, and dairy products are less consumed, or the percentage of vegetarians is very high in India. And that's also true for many other cultures in the eastern part of world as well. Many of the times, because the per capita consumption is one of the least in the world, right? And so is true in India. But if you do a state-by-state comparison, the number of meat eaters is 71%. Self-reported. This is the most concise available data from the government of India, done on a census level scale, which essentially indicates to us that economic indicators. And when I was telling you earlier about the early adopter cohort in India, right? So that's 9-10 crore worth of population. That's 7-8% of our total population, living in cities, metro areas. Understanding, having those kind of connotations to understand sustainability, etc., they might be able to pay a premium. But again, price, taste, and convenience is the golden rule. Unless it tastes exactly the same, unless it gives you that good feeling that you have while eating a chicken soup that your mom made, exactly the way, like think about every state in India, right? And think about the kind of consumption of dishes we are looking at. Very, very wide consumption of dishes, right? Whether it's a biryani, it's hundreds of different curries, it's keema, it's bunch of different seafood dishes. And, Indians are not eating hamburgers or sausages like Western countries for a fact. So local product market fit is very, very important. And, the way people buy, meat industry in India is very disorganized. So when people go out in the market and purchase something, they're not buying from for example, a frozen supply chain like in the US from a Walmart, right? They're used to seeing the meats getting slaughtered in front of them. And that might be true for China and many other Eastern cultures as well, because that kind of a disorganized meat market is more prominent. So replicating a lot of those things, but still we are seeing a huge growth in this early adopter cohort of online meat delivery portals now in India, which are catering to this huge, rapid increasing meat demand. So the question really here is that the first market you tap into in any country basically would be the early adopter cohort. And unless you innovate on nutrition, price, convenience, taste, everything, right? All of those parameters, which are very difficult to solve for, which will happen in the next 20 years as economies of scale hit, only then you'll be able to cater to masses, like Eugene was also kind of referring to, but I'll come back to him on that point. In India, we saw a lot of biomimics. So, a lot of people confuse, for example, jackfruit burgers with plant-based meats. Essentially, a meat eater is not eating a jackfruit burger and saying, hey, this tastes like meat, because he's used to eating meat in a very specific format in India. And this is some of the examples of version 1.0 products that we saw as, local product market fits in our own country in India. And I'm sure some of these existed, like soya nuggets, high vegetarian protein kebabs, patties, etc., in Malaysia as well in the past few years. The thing is, this limits your market to a vegetarian, high vegetarian protein seeking kind of a cohort, which is not a major cohort even in our country, because the kind of demand you're looking to cater to is the non-vegetarian cohort. So we are seeing a lot of this innovation of version 2.0 companies now, which are catering to the local product market fits, like, making biryani from plant-based meats, making different curries from plant-based meats, snacking items from plant-based meats specific to India. And obviously, the good thing in India is we don't eat a lot of our meat raw or, rare, medium or stuff like that, right? Not raw, but basically rare, medium or less cooked. So we don't need a lot of blood. Curries and spices kind of cover up a lot of flavor and does that job. I'm sure that's also true for Malaysia, which is why local product market fit becomes quite important in these parts of Southeast Asia and the Eastern cultures, and how those all kind of the textures and flavors all work with each other. And at the same time, this is the local landscape that we're seeing in version 2.0 products in our country for plant-based meat products. Different celebrities are getting involved, large scale manufacturers are jumping in. We are seeing a lot of innovation on plant-based dairy front, and also some new ingredient functionality innovation on the ingredient side of things. So between Malaysia and India, to your question, Alibaba, the synergies that I see is firstly in the markets. And this is also true globally. Obviously, local product market fit is super important. And that's why I was giving you the examples earlier of even MNCs trying to enter the Asian region. They have to heavily, kind of rely on the local product market cues to develop their products. They're not going to get done with just selling hamburgers or sausages in this part of town, right? You need to give people meat in the form they're used to eating, at the price points they're used to eating. Globally, in the past 20 years since Beyond and Impossible, the leaders in this domain, we've seen price cuts to huge degrees, and the cost comparables between plant-based and cultivated are like on thousands of degrees currently. These are completely two different technology areas, right? That's why cultivated meat won't become available in a supermarket at the price at which you used to eating meat for another probably 5 to 10 years. But things are moving very rapidly on that front as well. But on the plant-based side of things, we are already seeing products in the market, like Walmart's, Costco's are launching at like 10%, 20%, 30%, 40% premium, and they're rapidly falling down. So basically what I'm saying is start with a cohort of consumers which are able to pay for XYZ benefits, health, environment, and who are relatively able to settle for probably not exact biomimics of meat, eggs, and dairy. But and again, this does not mean over-processing or chemical-laden technologies, right? Pasteurization is a great technology which makes milk safe for us. High-pressure processing came to preserve beverages now, as a lot of you might have heard, by using pressure rather than heat. It just made the process better without any chemicals. So extrusion, innovation in extrusion, which are just sheer mechanical forces, does not necessarily mean that you have to replicate texture by adding chemical additives. So there are a lot of these perspectives to be considered on that front. And between Malaysia and India, I think a lot of those consumer insights might hold true as well. But I'd love to talk with Eugene more on his perspectives on that front as well. And then about the mission for smart protein we have in India, we call the all protein sector as the smart protein sector in India, for all the smart connotations the protein has really on environment, planet, resources, health, land use, water use, all of it, right? And we are focusing on indigenous crops. And I think that's what I think Malaysia can also do quite well in some of the crops it has established its value chain. We're looking to develop a lot of protein innovations hub for the global south, because unless there's robust sci-tech talent infrastructure and food co-manufacturing infrastructure and food value chains for plant proteins, none of these is going to become a success. India processes 8% of its fresh produce compared to US, which does 80% of its fresh produce processing. So there's a huge difference between the infrastructure between two countries. And I'm sure those contexts apply for Malaysia and other Southeast Asian countries as well. But we're looking to set up synergies between research and academic institutions in the global south so that they can serve. So again, another perspective to look at is maybe because of this high vegetarian cohort, the local markets will develop slowly in the shorter run. But the global demand exists for businesses, especially the ones coming to today's trade fair, right? So we look at India as a make in India supply for the world kind of a hub because of its low-cost manufacturing, so manufacturing futures initiatives, at the same time, availability of highly productive talent pool, which is also the case for Malaysia, as I know from many industries compared to its neighboring countries. So these are some areas in which we can look at establishing global manufacturing hubs for supplying the European demand, North American demand for protein isolates, concentrates, end products in the shorter run. And at the same time, we're looking to develop smart protein corridors. So India, Malaysia relationship becomes important there, especially with more developed countries with more technologies. India and Malaysia kind of fall on the same spectrum of technology readiness levels, but many other countries have more developed technology readiness levels. And I think, installing coursework, knowledge leadership, we run a lot of open access research programs across Ivy League universities, top plant universities in Asia, cultivated research across multiple universities, and we do that open access format. So it's funded through philanthropy, and then people or industry stakeholders would be able to use some of that as it becomes available in the next few years, since research for some of this takes quite some time as well. I do recommend getting people on our websites so that they can understand a lot of these things that I've said today. We have consumer reports done across many countries, a lot of data validation, industry reports for a lot of this tracking as well. So please feel free to take a look at all of that on a specific website for gfi.org and gfi.org.in for India. And I'd love to answer some more questions as we go on with other panelists and hear their perspectives as well. Thank you, Eugene. Thank you, Alibaba.
All right. Well, thank you, Shadu. Certainly, it's very exciting to see the collaboration between India and Southeast Asia countries materializes very soon. So now I would like to ask Dr. Nida. 2 questions to you, Doctor. First questions, as you said, plant proteins have 1 or 2 essential amino acids in lower amount, and the digestibility of plant protein is lesser than animal protein. So how can we improve the protein quality of a vegetarian diet? And number 2, what are the additional benefits if we are replacing animal protein with plant protein?
Thank you, Alibaba. So there is this myth that people think vegetarians don't get enough protein, vegetarians don't get good quality protein. This is actually a myth. You can actually have all essential amino acids if you balance your diet. That is, if you have foods from all food groups. See, like cereals have essential amino acid that is lysine in lower amounts, but they have abundant methionine. Whereas legumes and pulses, they have methionine in lower amounts, but they have abundant lysine. So you need to combine cereals and pulses, but it's not necessary that at every meal you have to consume cereals and pulses. You need not strictly combine at every meal the cereals and pulses. You can eat cereals and pulses anytime in a day, but make sure in a day you derive protein from cereals, nuts, legumes. Need not at every meal. You have to consume food from different food sources throughout the day. And another important thing can be done. What can be done is these legumes and pulses. The Indian cooking practices such as soaking and germination and sprouting, all this will increase the digestibility of protein. So our ancestors and our grandmothers always soak the legumes before cooking. They even they allow those legumes for germination. So these sprouted legumes and the soaked legumes are all can all have good protein digestibility. And yeah, if you asked me about the benefit of replacing animal protein with plant protein, firstly I'd like to say that plant protein, when you derive protein from plant sources, you tend to eat less cholesterol, you tend to eat less saturated fat, because animal food contain higher fat content. They have higher cholesterol levels, they have higher saturated fat. All these will give up, will increase your risk of developing cardiovascular diseases in the long run, especially if you're if you have a sedentary lifestyle and you're not much active and you tend to consume more animal food, then you derive more saturated fat and cholesterol. But when you switch to plant protein, you will be getting the protein, but you will also not be getting the cholesterol and saturated fat. And plant foods are high in unsaturated fat, which is good for you and will not cause increase in cholesterol. And one more thing I'd like to say, nowadays this livestock and animal husbandry, all these practices, they use a lot of antibiotics and growth hormones. So when you switch from animal food to plant food, you will save yourself from all these problems like antibiotics and growth hormones. And yeah, most importantly, we have to also think about the environmental impact, as Mr. Shardul beautifully explained how animal husbandry and livestock cultivation can cause a lot of greenhouse emission of a lot of greenhouse effect gases. So when you switch from animal to plant protein, you will be playing a responsible role of protecting the environment against these gases. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nida. Certainly, we got all the misconception is all resolved, and then I believe there will be more taken in terms of plant-based protein. All of us can be rest assured that the plant protein is equally sufficient to our overall health and well-being. And to our final panelist of the day, Eugene, likewise, I have two questions. First one, do you think plant meat will take off here in Asia? And final question, what are the key differences in terms of the adoption of plant-based diet here in Asia and those in the Western markets?
Yes, so before I answer that, I just want to quickly answer I saw a lot of questions in the chat box and the Q&A. They were still challenging or doubting, is the plant-based burger, plant-based this and that really healthier for we to eat today? You know, I really have to challenge that concept. You know, a lot of people are saying that the plant-based products that we're promoting today, be it plant-based milk or plant-based meat, they're too processed. They think if it's too processed, it's not healthy. They were thinking, oh, the animal meat and seafood is a lot healthier. You know what? Think about it. If you mandatory require by law that all the animal, whatever chemicals you injected on it, and to be labeled on that ingredient list, and if you legally require all the seafood, whatever heavy metal or microplastic they digest it into their digestive system to be labeled on that ingredient list, you know what? You'll be surprised. The natural thing you think, have a longer ingredient list than the plant-based product. Do you know we're using anywhere between 1,200 to 1,600 different chemicals on the animals we're raising today? That's amazing. You know, I'm not attacking the animal industry. I'm trying to point out the fact that today, in the name of efficiency, today, because of overpopulation, today, because of global warming, a lot of the issues, crazy issues that we did to contribute to this reality. So when you're saying the processed food is too processed, you're talking about the processed food 1.0. We're back in the 60s and 70s. Food companies, they process the foods without transparency. The cost is the only driver. They process for their corporate profit. Now, welcome to the processed food 2.0, where all these plant-based foods, in my personal opinion, be it old-fashioned or new-fashioned, we are processed food 2.0. Why? Because we are processing it for the future of our generation, for the mankind's health, for a lot of the benefits, for good or big or small. And more importantly, thanks to the mobile phone you have in your pocket, thanks to the social media, transparency is a default. Transparency is a must. If you don't have the transparency, you lie, screw you. You're gonna be damned by a lot of the netizen and a lot of consumers. So transparency today is almost a default. So I hope and I wish everyone try not to criticize what they put in that plant-based meat or plant-based milk. Try to see the positive. It is actually a better option, seriously, period. Now, getting back to your question, Alibaba, unfortunately, I still hold my answer. I don't see a sign that plant-based meat will take off right here, but plant-based milk will. Why? Because we've been drinking plant-based milk for like ever. So plant-based milk is another bright spot. So is the plant-based dairy, because we have a lot of lactose intolerant people here in Asia. Just unfortunately, we don't eat that much of cheese, even though our lifestyle has been changed. Now, I'm sorry, what is your second question? I apologize.
All right, suddenly this 2.0 got you too excited.
Right.
So the second question is actually, what are the key differences in the adoption of plant-based diet here in Asia and those in the Western markets?
Yeah, so I think the key difference is that, you know, I just mentioned in my presentation that price is very important. The second thing I think plant-based diet right here is that, you know, in the Western market, they try to simulate the original animal product they're trying to make. Here in Asia, I think manufacturers should take a different approach. I think the consumers here will be okay with something new, a new category, meaning that your burger does not have to taste beefy or meaty. And people here will be okay with that. Because why? Tofu and tempeh is a clear demonstration how people see those new plant-based texture product. So the important issue right here in Asia is not how meaty, how flavor you're close to the real animal thing, how texture-wise you're perfect, nailing down that flaky, fishy texture. No, it's not that. It's the price, it's the health contribution, and more importantly, does it taste okay? You know, I wouldn't use the word taste good because that's just too general. As long as you're tasting okay, tasting like, this is quite okay for me to cook into my mapo tofu, you know, quite okay to make into my curry stuff, you know, then I will buy it. So I really see that for a lot of the manufacturers right here, they should take a really different approach here in the Asian market than any other markets in the world. So that just my 2 cents.
Well, thanks, Eugene. Personally, I'm an adopter of plant-based diet predominantly, but I don't think there's a huge cost in terms of there's a huge cost of penalty in terms of cost when adopting this lifestyle. So with that, all right, ladies and gentlemen, let's move into the Q&A session. And thanks for all the questions that's coming to the chat box. And right now, okay, questions to Mr. Shadu. What are the challenges seen in the plant-based protein production? And particularly, which process is critical? Is it the extrusion or mixing? So that's the first question. I'll be followed with the second question.
Excellent questions. It's a huge question, right? People are doing PhDs on these topics. I've put in a link for many people to go through the key white space areas behind the science of plant-based meat and plant-based proteins, and the key challenge is to advance the entire sector that we are focusing on. But obviously, the things that I talked throughout my session, right, all of those parameters, allergenicity, availability of plant proteins, obviously the functional properties, because for example, I was talking about this earlier as well, especially from the Indian context. There are two separate consumer cohorts, right? There are vegetarians and vegans, which are vegans are single low digits. So that's not really the driver of the sector at all in our country. And even majorly globally, like 90% of the sales of these products from majority of the companies are coming from flexitarians or hardcore non-vegetarians. Now, for example, the functionality and taste, texture, and mouthfeel characteristics are the biggest scientific challenges, which is what's really changed, right? I mean, the thing about tofu and seitan and every other, like India, every McDonald's, Burger King, every chain that exists in India has a veggie burger. It had that, but still the meat consumption is going up as it has globally, right? Despite of availability of all of these substitutes per se, which are not necessarily biomimicking the taste. So taste is the biggest challenge in science right now. Flavor balance, taste balance, allergenicity issues are the key scientific bottlenecks. So in terms of production and scale up, the value chains don't exist. If I'm an entrepreneur in India, where am I going to source? Like we are one of, like Malaysia and India are one of the largest producers of mung beans, right? Which is the kind of isolates you need to make a plant-based egg, which is a successful company, even launched in many countries in Southeast Asia, Eat Just. But I don't think if we are supplying them enough, So the thing is, nobody's making these isolates and concentrates. India is still not supplying. So there's a huge white space there in terms of the infrastructure needed. Now, extruders, right, which is a kind of main technology you talked about. India does not have a lot of high moisture extruders at all. So where are you going to make these moist, meaty products? Because if you give somebody a soy chunk and it tastes dry, and you're essentially trying to give it to a meat eater, and they are not ready to compromise on taste, right? Like from what I understand, taste is what everybody holds quite close to their heart, and gastronomic experiences as well. So unless you replicate that, why would somebody ask you, if you're a non-vegetarian, would you compromise on eating your chicken, meat, or any dish in the format that is currently available to you? If yes, what kind of price are you looking to pay for it? So I think those are some of the challenges that most of the scientific community is really trying to solve for.
Right, thank you. And second question, a lot of negative feedback has been raised in reference to some of the plant-based ingredients and specific to the taste, texture, umami. Is there some R&D done to improve these aspects of the food? Could, for example, just get your opinion, please. Thank you.
Sure, I can quickly give my opinion in line, and then perhaps Dr. Nida can also talk about it. But a lot of these issues raised from the aftertaste, like consider soy, right? Excellent ingredient in many parameters. India is one of the largest producers of non-GM soy. But because some of the scientific bottlenecks like allergenicity issues, aftertaste issues, and the thing is, I was telling you, right, for the past 70 years, green revolution happened in India, across many other countries over the world. We focused on very few crops: rice, wheat, potato, corn, soy. So basically, these crops have been optimized now on all the different hidden scientific bottlenecks. But we haven't done that for tons of millets, pulses, beans, lentils. So all of that knowledge gap is missing. So that's why all of the companies and startups working now are building their IP and technological moats, really. So and what we are trying to do as sector building organization is do open access through and through wherever we fund anything or communities we build, so that more and more people can learn. Because these things, if they keep evolving in silos, right, like they did in the version 1.0 kind of generation of food processing, like Eugene mentioned, then we are not getting anywhere. So there has to be a lot of collaboration between different countries and scientific and technology communities as well. So yeah.
All right. Thank you, Shadu. That's very interesting insights from you. So right now to Dr. Nida, the first question is, do cell-based meat have all or most of the health risks of conventional meats, other than hormones and antibiotics, and also the contamination induced during the slaughtering process, such as salmonella?
Okay. Thank you. Here, Mr. Alibaba, I think Mr. Shadul can give better insights, because I'm mostly into the nutrition and the health benefits
Sure.
of the discussion. Mr. Shadul can give better insight.
Sure. I'd love to give an insight on key difference, right? We don't talk much about cultivated meat. That's a completely different kind of a cohort, right? When people ask me between plant-based meat, fermentation meat, cultivated meat, which is made from cellular agriculture, how do you see people kind of placing them in 2050? What kind of market shares? It's very difficult to answer that, because firstly, all of these cohorts are going to appeal to different set of target groups, right? Think about it. Cultivated meat is actual real cells that you're taking from a biopsy from an animal. The animal doesn't die. In the entire process, you're looking at animal free serum, etc., etc. And the end product you're getting is actual animal tissue, right? That's not plant-based. So it's not vegan technically, right? It's actual meat. So if you had a shellfish allergy and I made a cultivated shellfish, I'm going to still have that allergy after I eat cultivated cell-based shellfish. So basically what that means is that other than all the bad things that the person who asked the questions, including, risk of contamination, the traceability issues, all of those would be gone. Firstly, the supply chain, the animal is eliminated from the value chain, right? So everything that goes along with it is eliminated. All the risks associated with salmonella, pathogens, the supply chain, transportation costs, the emissions in environment, all of that is gone. And you can retain all the elements of, actual meat into your end product, but also perhaps with enough research, we can look at tailoring it a little bit, decreasing some of the bad carbohydrates like Dr. Nida earlier mentioned, and improving more better ones. And same can be done with plant-based as well. For example, plant-based meats. You can increase more fiber, which is not possible from animals in the plant-based meats, and still retain the taste and umami nature of the meat that people love and crave for. So yeah, that's the kind of technology advancements we are looking at here.
All right. Thanks, Eugene, for weighing in. Okay, Eugene, you have a question?
Yeah. Can I weigh in, Shadu? I really have to question this a little bit, because we're studying closely about cell-based meat as well. I think that I agree that their future is to replicating the meat and seafood experience. But for now, that's a huge difference. Say, for example, one thing they cannot recreate is that a lot of meat has this fecal bacteria. This, when you slaughter the animal, they shit, and that actually comes in contact with the meat, and that gives the meat a wonderful shitty flavor. It's really a shitty flavor, but that's wonderful. And that's not replicable in the cell-based process. Another thing that cannot be replicable yet is that they have to grow the meat and the blood separately. And you see my point. The meat has to mix with the blood, and more importantly, the fat as well. And so all the meat, the blood, and the fat has to grow separately. And how can you combine it back and make that wonderful 100% true experience is my mind-boggling question. And this is even more difficult than the seafood. The seafood is even more difficult challenge than this is that, in the seafood, not only they don't have the texture, they also, the cell is not swimming in the ocean. So it doesn't really have this seafoody, fishy flavor because never in their lifetime, they digest the microalgae. So all these are crazy problems the cell base has to conquer. And that will take them at least a good 10, 20 years, in my personal opinion. Just my 2 cents. Sorry about that. Alibaba.
Well, thanks for weighing in.
Alibaba, just quickly agreeing with Eugene. Very true, right? What he's just rounding it off. Like I said, all of the other food industries have been existing for decades. We are transforming something here which hasn't been done for thousands of years. Meat, eggs, and dairy has been consumed by humans for millions of years when they started hunting, and recently in past few 100,000 years when we started industrialized animal agriculture in the current form. We are trying to change that, and obviously all the investment stats, the market size from all the reports, thought leadership papers, hundreds of scientists working on it is basically potential of what would happen. Plant-based meat is obviously way ahead in the current what's possible and sold in the market. Cultivated meat will happen and is rapidly happening. With Singapore's example, like I gave, you can order it now and get it delivered. And many other countries, US will follow suit. Multiple other countries have their products, and huge reduction, 80x reduction in the media cost, 80x reduction. So all of this is, by the way, Eugene, possible with scaffolds, right? You put all of these cells and those scaffolds get shapes and different stakes. There's a lot of science behind it. I'll invite people to take a look at our website for more details on the entire value chain as well.
Well, certainly it's very exciting from the insights from both of the gentlemen. So back to you, Doctor. So regarding non-essential amino acids, do animal-based food also contain non-essential amino acids? So this is one of the questions from the floor.
Yes, I'd like to share my presentation here. Yes, animal protein also contain non-essential amino acid. I'd like to show you. Okay, is it visible, Alibaba?
No, it's coming. Yeah. It's coming up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, here you can see I have listed the different sources. Here you can see the animal sources also contain non-essential amino acid at the level of 100, 98, etc. percentage, etc. But when compared to a plant protein, the animal proteins have lesser non-essential amino acid. Here you can see the non-essential amino acids are more in plant protein. Research has shown that more non-essential amino acids have many added advantages and health benefits. So animal protein also contain non-essential, but plant protein definitely, it contains more than animal protein. You can see here, almond contains up to as much as 136% of non-essential amino acids. So this non-essential amino acid has many health benefits. So yeah, I hope I answered it.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Nina. So now questions are pointing for Mr. Eugene. So these are the questions from the floor. So number one, do we have an idea of the health effects of the additive used in the new form of plant-based burgers, like including those cultivated cells-based burgers?
So if your question is talking about the heme protein that Impossible specially developed, fermented and GMO method to make it happen, for that, I don't have an answer. But if you're talking about the rest of us, meaning other plant-based meat and seafood makers who use just the regular regulatory approved natural or synthetic flavoring, I would say yes, it is certainly 100%, well, at least in my personal opinion, 100% safe. I mean, like I said, there are too many dangerous things. If you consider anything chemical is dangerous, there are too many dangerous things you digest it unknowingly, even walking out your door and the fume coming out from that car, you don't know how much you digest into your respiratory system, So if you're that kind of purist, then I think you would disagree with my answer. But if you're like the rest of the folks that, okay, we're not living in a perfect world, but we're living in a world that we're trying to make it better, then I would say yes, these flavoring absolutely will be okay because they're regulatory control and monitored by all the governments around the world.
Right.
Just quickly adding a thought there, I think I'll encourage everybody to look at current generation of products as something which you're striving to improve, which you cannot do with meat, right? More nutrition, everything is going to come in version 2.0, 3.0 products, which is bound to happen. It's a matter of when and not if, basically, because that's what's bound to happen. Just like with technology, these products are going to become healthier. The current version you're seeing, like I said, for early adopters is something you have to begin with, right? When you're setting up a new sector. And in many ways, 99%, 90% of the plant protein businesses, plant-based meat businesses specifically, are not using any novel ingredients at all. They're all proprietary approved ingredients by regulatory bodies in India and wherever these countries are, respective countries the products are made from. So obviously they undergo a lot of food safety testing and all of that as well. And most people who don't understand food science get it right, but dose and toxicity, like if you say something is hydrogen dioxide and sell it instead of water, people are going to be scared. It's the same point Eugene's making. If you put everything on label that essentially goes in the value chain of meat, it's going to be a little tricky for people to really understand the difference. So most people are going to be like, hey, hydrogen dioxide, I'm not drinking that, but it's just water, right? It's just chemicals. That's everywhere. That's what most people don't really get, and I think should pay more attention to. But yeah, just that.
All right. So one more question to Eugene before we wrap this wonderful afternoon up, right? As long as egg poultry demands remain high globally, and then all this poultry, meat, and egg will still be the major protein source, right? So how do we get away from a transition to the plant-based diet that we are talking in the whole afternoon?
I really have to correct this. We're not saying that we're trying to reduce your animal consumption. We're not saying that we're trying to reduce your chicken or egg consumption. And quite frankly, they're going to be the major player for the foreseeable future. Possibly even my Sophie's daughter will still see the major protein being these animal protein. My point is that we're coming up with this alternative protein, trying to solve a very critical environmental issue, supply chain issue, health issue, and more importantly, sustainability issues. We're not telling the world that, hey, give up the animal meat altogether, switch over to this plant-based meat. That's not going to happen. We all know that. But slowly but surely, if you take one meal a week, make it plant-based, I guarantee you, you will do 2 meals, 3 meals a week in the next few months, or even at least the next few years. And slowly but surely, we can move the whole society to the right direction. That's our point. And quite frankly, there is a natural disaster that possibly will be happening in terms of global warming, in terms of the space issue, because we have more urbanization to accommodate more people. We have more deforestation happening for these people to get their animal foods. And slowly but surely, you will run into an equation where the cost of these animal protein will shot up like a hockey stick, where no one can imagine. And if that happens, nature will take over. And all of a sudden, overnight, our best case scenario, where plant-based protein or even alternative protein become the key player, will be happening. So by that, I'm saying to the world that, no, we're not trying to urge you or push you to do that. We're trying to get you to buy into this concept first. And then we want to make friends with you. And slowly but surely, when you see the fit, see the need, come on, please consider our new protein. We're really cheaper. We're really better, healthier, sustainable. And that, why would you not buy our protein? So that would be my my sales pitch for the people into the future. Yeah.
Certainly, that's how my mom felt when I recommended her to plant-based protein. There's totally no gun pointing into your head. Just like, hey, you got to change completely. Just try it once a day, or probably like once a week. That's how I actually convinced to other people as well. So another question from the floor to Dr. Nida. After your presentation on plant-based protein, I have decided to switch to plant-based protein because of just the benefits of the plant protein. Can you please tell me any health complication if I shift completely from animal-based protein to plant-based? That's for Dr. Nida.
Yeah, that's a very nice question. I would like to say here that, see, our ancestors from the hunter-gatherer society they were actually consuming a lot of meat, if you all know. Before the agriculture started in, they used to hunt animals, they used to consume meat. So I believe we all know about that. But the only difference now, and when you compare to back then, the thing is, we are not active. We are not going on hunting animals. We are not involving a lot of physical activity. Our lifestyle is mostly sedentary. So we can't stick to our ancestors that saying, hey, our ancestors used to eat a lot of animal food. They used to hunt and eat animals, and even I'm going to follow that. That is not going to suit in this scenario when you are so comfortable not doing, there are like the physical activity is very, very less. So it's a very good thing that if you change from animal protein to plant protein, I can guarantee you that there will be no health complications, because they're like animal. I can even tell you that if you are into excessive workout, and if you're an athlete, like you do excessive gymming, like you spend at least 2 to 3 hours building your muscle, at that such individuals need extra attention when they switch from animal to plant, because it's very easy to get more protein from animal sources. But when you switch to plant source, you tend to get more carb along with protein. That is one concern. But yeah, like texturized vegetable protein and soy protein isolate, I'd like to recommend that if you're an athlete and want to switch from animal protein to plant protein, you opt for soy protein isolate. Soy protein isolate has very close quality compared, it's very closer to animal protein in terms of all essential nutrients and in terms of digestibility. So soy protein isolate, if you are an athlete and you want to build muscle, and you want to switch from animal to plant, you can go for soy protein isolate. And yeah, there will be no health complications for sure. I can vouch for that. If you change your diet from animal based to plant based, you will actually find many benefits.
Oh, that's very good news for me too, because I'm a very active runner and cyclist. So definitely after this session, I'll be rushing to get my soy protein isolate for this. And Dr. Nida, another question. B12 is highly discussed that we need it for our, daily supplements. So what's your view about vitamin B12, and how do vegetarians get this?
Yeah, that is a very big concern. So there is this concern that vitamin B12 is mainly present in animal food and not in plant food. I will tell you, our bacteria, good bacteria, can produce a lot of vitamin B12. So if there is good bacteria in your gut, okay, if there are good bacteria in your intestine, you will naturally have good vitamin B12 status, because that bacteria in your intestine will produce vitamin B12. Okay, so you don't have to worry about eating it from a food source. So how do you promote the good bacteria growth in your gut? That is by having a lot of prebiotics, like fiber-rich food. Fiber is not digested by our body. It acts as food for the gut microbes. That is why people who eat a lot of fibrous food like fruits and vegetables, they have more good bacteria in their gut, because they are eating more fiber from the plant sources. And that fiber can promote the growth of bacteria in the gut, and that bacteria in your gut can produce a lot of B12 vitamins. And also fermented products are good for, because there in fermentation also there are lots of good bacteria producing vitamin B12. So you can go for low fat curd, but if you're strict vegetarian, then you can go for soy products like tofu. So all these products do contain vitamin B12. But the most important thing is, please promote the growth of good bacteria in your gut, and they will take care of most of the B complex vitamins, including vitamin B12.
Right. Thank you, doctor, for your insights. And final questions. It's vegan or plant-based lifestyles are actually cheap to adopt. So this is open to the floor. So any of the panelists can actually weigh in on this.
So sorry, can you repeat the question, please, Alibaba?
Okay, it's vegan or plant-based lifestyles actually cheap. So it's like, it's affordable to adopt. So I think that's the meaning of the question. So maybe you can start with Shadu, probably like followed by Eugene, and then probably like Dr. Nina.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Great question, right? I mean, see, price testing convenience. It has to be affordable. Otherwise, we are not going to make any impact. Simple, right? I live in India. I have hundreds and hundreds of varieties of plant proteins available. I'm a vegetarian lifelong. I'm never going to eat meat. That's the whole point. That's a high vegetarian cohort category, right? The thing is, I have a lot of diversity, which is cheap. Plant proteins are cheap. Being vegan is super easy in India, right? Everybody's a vegan by default if you are not able to afford meat. So the Western notion of veganism is quite different, which is why I'm saying vegans are not the target cohort for this sector. Plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy, at least, right? For the larger, plant-based foods, obviously, high protein segment is a huge growth cohort, but that's still going to be limited because 95% of the global population is non-vegetarian. And you earlier asked how to make this transition and shift, right? It's a switch that we are asking people to make. We have to make that switch simple, like Eugene was saying, right? And that's why, like, to get there by 2050, feed 10 billion people. And somebody was asking in the chat section that, all of this plant-based shift, it's obviously, like Eugene said, it's not going to happen now. It's going to be like a step function, so it's not going to happen just one day. It's basically going to happen over time. It's not going to be a step function. So basically what I'm trying to get at is, even like we slaughter 80 to 100 billion animals every year. That's definitely not natural by any bounds. People think that we're still living in a world where, there's a cow with every home, few farmers have few cows and few chickens roaming around. That's not happening anywhere. How are you going to feed 10 billion people with that kind of a, food ecosystem? So that's very important to understand, like what are the ground realities of environmental needs and how we're looking to make that shift. So I guess it's cheap for sure, but the transition to that will happen for different consumer cohorts and their paying capacity over the next few years. And because most people wouldn't like to compromise, even if they're paying low for something, they wouldn't probably want to compromise on taste and texture, right? Because that's what everybody's kind of food is central to everybody's life, and they don't want to compromise on those experiences. So yeah.
Well, thanks, Shadu. And Eugene, would you like to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I got an MBA degree, so I see this as a business question, business issue. This is not really a technical issue. It's all about supply and demand. Right now, the demand is just not enough. So supply is naturally high. It's not that we're naturally more expensive. It's because there are not enough people to get onto the demand side. That's why we're pushing people, not really pushing, we're urging people to get on more of the plant-based diets. The more people eat it, the lower the cost will be. So before that happens, another thing we're counting on is the natural phenomenon. What is the natural phenomenon I'm talking about? Is the fact that, if you watch the pricing index of all the animal meat and even their feed, slowly but surely, the pricing is slowly creeping up. And especially what's more evident is the pork price index last year in China. Because the swine flu, because they're in trade war with all the soy producers in the West. So their poor pigs cannot get enough foods, and the pork price went up quite dramatically. Do you think this is not going to happen in the future? Well, think again. Do you think this is going to happen more and more? Well, I think so. And when that happens more and more, you will see our plant-based foods become more affordable. And so, like I said, it is all about supply and demand. When the supply and demand make that cross, yes, hallelujah, our plant-based protein or alternative protein will become the most affordable solution or option you can have. Wait for that day to happen. I cannot say which day it's going to happen, but I guarantee you it will. If you look at all the numbers, if you say it won't, think again.
All right. Certainly coming from an economy standpoint, that's a very interesting question. Okay, Dr. Nida, would you like to chip in on this?
Here I would like to say, as Mr. Eugene said, when the demand increases, certainly we can all afford it. So this is how we have started off, on a good note with this panel discussion. Many people have got insights about the health benefits of plant protein and from environment, and it's very important to have good impact on the environment. So from our presentations from Mr. Shardul and Mr. Eugene and from myself, you have now all the information with you to take the decision of slowly adopting plant-based protein, slowly adopting plant-based food, plant-based diet. So when this need increases, then there will definitely be a good future and everybody can afford it once the demand increases.
Well, thank you, Dr. Nida. So that's a wrap for our Q&A session. But before we end this wonderful session, I would like to get a simple takeaway from each of the panelists, probably starting with Mr. Shadu. What is your golden code for our everyone, every single one of us here, just to take away in the future of this plant-based journey?
Sure. I mean, agreeing with a lot of different points, right? And I think we have to understand where everybody's coming from. So when we talk about supply and demand, where our fundamental theory of change for the entire sector is. So thing is consumer awareness, like all of these things, right? Whether it's the land use, environmental pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, water use, seafood basically destroying our coral reefs. We've known that. UN, FAO, every major research organization has been saying that for decades now. The thing is, as we saw from all of our crops all over the world, meat, eggs, dairy consumption keeps growing up. The thing, like rightly said by everyone, is the demand for meat, eggs, and dairy is growing rapidly up. For plant proteins, it's there, absolutely there. But why would somebody who's already not craving meat, eggs, and dairy want something which tastes like meat, eggs, and dairy, right? So the production constraints for meat, eggs, and dairy are more important, which is the technology available to make it. So for India, I can speak for sure, confidently, plant-based meat manufacturing technology does not exist. So there's no production capacity. All the challenges we saw on all of these plant ingredients, that's a production bottleneck. Unless you enable the doers and production people to basically make these products, the demand can never really increase. So that's the theory of change to understand. Like in the past few decades, the demand has really skyrocketed for some of these products is because the simple switches were available in the first place in the market and new categories were created. So that's a point I have to leave everybody with, basically in terms of thinking plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. But for high protein products, right, the demand was always there for some of the populations and will keep increasing. And I think there's a mix between those two as well, right? Many people for health reasons, sustainability reasons are now okay with eating something high vegetarian protein, but not necessarily mimicking the taste of meat, eggs, and dairy. For sure. But in terms of the 10 billion people and 95% non-vegetarians, to kind of reach there, that was the context of my presentation today from a food systems perspective to getting there. So I guess that's the kind of takeaway I have for my specific session, but definitely agree with a lot of points that Eugene and Nita mentioned in terms of health benefits, that, step transition. And obviously, unless there's awareness, it's kind of a twofold thing, right? You won't have the demand. So yeah.
Right. Thank you, Shadu. Right. For Dr. Nida, would you like to give us a short but concise takeaway for all the people over here?
Yeah. So in my presentation, I highlighted the importance of plant protein. I'm not saying that animal protein is bad. It is like very bad. I'm not saying that. All I'm trying to say is everything should be eaten in the balanced amount. You can be a non-vegetarian, but you cannot eat the meat. You cannot eat meat the whole day, right? Just because you love meat, you cannot eat meat the whole day. Then you will be missing on, you will be missing out the fruits and vegetables and the fiber and all that. So whatever you eat in a balanced amount, right? Like it is recommended that if you're a non-vegetarian, you're supposed to eat only 100 to 150 gram of flesh food. But I see people eating kg. At one serving, they eat half chicken or one chicken. That is a trend happening everywhere. So it is all about moderation. It is all about eating everything in a balanced form. You're getting food from all sources. Don't eat only, only dals the whole day, only carbs the whole day, only meat the whole day. You need to eat everything in small amount to get the benefits of all the food. And go for healthier options, go for skinless chicken, go for, lean cuts, go for low fat yogurt. So on that, doing such decisions, you will train your brain to automatically make healthy decisions. Because when you eat plant food, you tend to eat more fat and cholesterol. So go for lean cuts, low fat dairy. You need to make such decisions. And when it comes to, you just try attempting following a plant-based diet, which has many benefits backed up by lots of clinical studies. So yeah, and be active. That's very important. It's very important to have at least 30 minutes or 45 minutes of physical activity in the form of brisk walking or a cardio or a resistant training at your house. You don't have to go to gym. So be active, have a balanced diet, and eat the animal food in moderation and have good plant sources of food.
Thank you, Dr. Nida. Eugene, over to you to wrap this up.
Yeah, I want to do something really unconventional. How old you think I am?
Question to the floor.
Obviously not to the floor, to you guys, to panelists. Okay, the floor says 40. All right. You know, I'm 53-year-old. Other than the fact that I got good gene from my parents, so I don't lost my hair. I still don't have the belly. Other than the fact that Zoom gave me a wonderful visual effect, there's no wrinkle. Actually, there's some wrinkle right here. But then again, what I want to tell you is that, you know, plant-based diet does help me a lot. Unlike all my peers in my same age group, they all put on their belly. They are all mostly obese. And not to mention my friends back in California, you know, a lot of them lost their hair already. I don't, you know, I credit that a lot other than to my parents, you know, because the gene, mostly to the plant-based diet. And I'm a personal demonstrator or example for all the people, you know, just try it. You know, I mean, it doesn't hurt. I mean, if you really so want to take that meat once in a while, okay, just kind of, you know, sneak in your diet just once in a while, but try to move on to plant-based diet for your good health and good looking. Trust me, you will feel energetic. You will feel good. You see my energy in my conversation already. And I'm not really, you know, proposing to my wife anymore. And so that is how I love this plant-based diet, how much I love this plant-based diet. And I hope everybody can just give it a shot if you haven't. That's my one liner.
Wow. That suddenly you dropped the mic, you know, when you told us like you are 53. So I'm sure all of you have found the responses extremely valuable. So just a very quick quote from myself as a plant-based adopter. So when I say this is what my personal experience. So when one door closes, another door opens, right? So if you choose to stay away animal meat for a while, even for a while, you'll be amazed by the options that you have offered by the Mother Nature. Seriously, give this a try. You will be very surprised that actually there's a whole new world open up to you, and all these plant options that's around the world, regardless of the, you know, the natural fruits, vegetables, or even the meats, or even the you know, other things, is actually you'll be amazed by the options. So again, a very meaningful and exciting future for food, especially in the plant-based domain. And then with that, I want to take this opportunity again to say thank you to Mr. Shadul Dabil, Dr. Nida Umasama, and Mr. Eugene Wang, right, for sharing their expert insights and perspective on the global demand on plant-based protein in our today's wonderful discussion. And again, I also want to thank every single one of you who took the time to join today's panel discussion. And I'm sure you have gained a lot from our experts today. Thank you once again, and see you next time. I wish you all a good evening. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, just a reminder for the remainder, because you have another discussion in next week, tomorrow. So just watch out for the MIFB website so you can register interest and then join the session tomorrow. So I'll see you guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, Mr. Ali Baba.
Bye-bye, Dr. India.